Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Debra Martel. I'm the Associate Director for the First Nations House of Learning, and I want to welcome you here as part of the Lunar Festival, which is incredibly exciting. But I think today, this session's probably going to be the best, if I can say that. All right? It's really an honor for me to be the MC today, so you'll see me pop up and down a few times, but I'm going to have the honor and the privilege to be welcoming the very important people that have made this day happen, and the information that they're going to share is going to be not only exciting, but hopefully thought-provoking for you when you go through your studies and as you consider your place within Canada. First and foremost, again, I want to welcome you here. This session is called Telling Stories of Chinese and First Nations relations at Musqueam and across Canada. And it's my honor to invite up Elder Larry Grant to acknowledge Musqueam.
Thank you. Hi, Tepka. Ayesa, Musqueam, y Teniten at Musqueam. Clark, the Shuanas, Capelano, y Coltimoto, but Helix, the Frina, Amy Cat, Free to eat, the Son, some of the Musqueam. Stack when the Shuanas, Capelano, set the sums and need to swallow, the theater, I tell Castin. No, I finish following, Gontico Sala, to swallow for E to know well. I want to say thank you to everyone that's here today. Thank you for everyone that put this together. It's really, really something, I think, for us to be here at this festival, the Lunar Festival. I'm Larry Grant from the Musqueam First Nation. Ayesa is my Musqueam name. We are descended from Teopalano, our great-great-great-grandparents that had welcomed the first visitors to this land when the first ships arrived with the Spanish Captain Narvaez and the English Captain George Vancouver. And as they did in the past, I do this afternoon and raise my hand and welcome to all of you here at UBC on the traditional, ancestral, unceded lands of the Musqueam-speaking Musqueam people. And I say unceded because this is the land that our people have lived on since the last ice age and have lived in our community continuously for 4,000 years or more. And we never sold the land. We never had an agreement with the Canadian government. We never lost it in a poker game. And so it's the underlying title in our history is still Musqueam lands. So, and most of British Columbia is unceded. So British Columbia has very few treaties or agreements for Canada to occupy the lands in British Columbia. So it's important that I explain a little bit of that because many people think it's because my father is one of the Chinese farmers of Musqueam that it's land that has no seeds in it. But in fact, we don't have an agreement with Canada. Again, I will say thank you again for being here and welcome again to Huntcavino speaking territory. See you all and the fall of the economic to know well. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. It is really, how many of you have heard Larry speak before? A lot of you. For those of you who haven't, that's not supposed to be funny. For a lot of us, it is a real privilege to be able to see him and hear from him almost daily, which is really a rewarding experience. And for those of you that have not, I hope you find some time, and it makes Larry even busier than he already is. But anytime you get an opportunity to sit down and have a conversation with somebody that has lived in this area for many years and can tell the story of their family in this area, and as Canada developed as we know it today, how those relationships formed and the excitement of that, sometimes the challenges with that as well, but where all of that history comes from and how it makes us a stronger group of people today. So again, thank you, Larry, for always sharing. I also want to take an opportunity to thank those, Larry mentioned that there were a number of people that took part to make this happen, so I want to take a moment to just acknowledge those that sponsored and partnered with this. We have UBC Asian Canadian Asian Migration Studies Program, UBC Centennial Office, UBC Equity and Inclusion Office, UBC First Nation and Endangered Language Program, UBC's First Nations House of Learning, and UBC's First Nation and Indigenous Studies Program. So thank you to them for making this possible. My next guest that I want to invite up, again, and I'm sure many of you already know, but it is a privilege to invite Professor Henry Yu forward to speak, and he's from the Department of History, but he's going to share with us the historical context with the Chinese, Canadian, and First Nations people across Canada, and as well as he's going to also share recent provincial recognition of Chinese historical sites nominated by communities themselves. So I think there's a little special film too that he'll introduce. So without further ado, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Deb, and thank you, Elder Grant, for I've learned so much from just listening to Larry over the years, and been really lucky that he's here on campus, as part of also teaching Musqueam, and working in other places with City of Vancouver projects, with provincial projects, and so it's one of my privileges that a lot of what I know, I've maybe gotten wrong sometimes, but he never really corrects me in a way that's humiliating to me. So, but thank you all for being here. I'm just going to go take about 10 minutes before showing a film clip, but the 10 minutes will be to give you some context about this idea of relations between Chinese Canadians, Chinese migrants, and First Nations. And we're going to go with a little bit about why over the last about 10, 15 years there's been more of an awareness. It's not that there wasn't always those relations. In fact, that's one of the points I would make. There's always been these relations between Chinese who came across the Pacific and went across Canada and local First Nations, Indigenous communities across Canada. But it's just the awareness was kind of forgotten or erased, you could say, obliterated from our historical record and memory. And so as these memories come back, I think that's why there's such an interest and curiosity right now, which I will also speak a little bit about. But I'm showing you this because this was actually a really key moment. People like Elder Grant had been talking about their own personal family stories, about being, from a family that had ancestry, both that was Indigenous as well as Chinese ancestry. But often these were individual stories, or, well, did you know so-and-so? I think Cedar and Bamboo, which was produced by the Chinese Canadian Historical Society, and the directors, Kamala Todd and Dinah Leung from the City of Vancouver, they had done this project called Storyscapes, which was about relations in the Chinatown, downtown East Side area between all kinds of people. But one of the stories that started to come out was this long history of Chinese and First Nations. And so the Chinese Canadian Historical Society, we put together some funding. I was on the board at the time, or still am, and we said, let's make a film so that we can broaden the awareness of it. And Cedar and Bamboo came out, and you'll see that this, an art piece was sort of commissioned, which was kind of interesting, again, stylistically, to try to capture those. Those who read Chinese and understand, those who don't, you can see this is what roughly the phrase is. It's from Sun Tzu, the Art of War, about when you're crossing the the river together in the same boat. And part of that was an allusion to a shared history of obviously racial discrimination and a long history of being excluded from the building of Canada and the provinces and being the out as an in-group was created. So one of the things that, just to give you a context for that moment, as I said, over the last 10, 15 years, where more and more people saw a film like Cedar and Bamboo. If you'd like to see it, it will be online, so anybody can watch it. It's really available. Excuse me. We did a project on the head tax, and people were paying the head tax. And this is a map of the 35,000 or so people who came between 1910 and 1923 who were Chinese, who had to pay the head tax. 1923 is the end point because at that point Chinese were excluded and they couldn't come anymore until 1947. So it's the beginning of the exclusion period. You can see where they're going. And it's pretty much every small town in Canada. They followed the railroad that they helped build in BC, and as other Europeans came across coming this way, Chinese filled the trains going the other way. Right? And they opened things like, next slide. They opened things like cafes. This is a weighted distribution map. And again, you can see a lot of people in Victoria and Vancouver that were Chinese, but there was also a lot in Montreal. There was people in the Maritimes. And you can see the prairies had a heavy concentration. Every prairie town had a Chinese-Canadian cafe, had a store that was run by Chinese. And often they related to each other in these small towns. And so one of the things we wanted to do in this project, and this Chinese-Canadian Stories project was a 2.5-year long project, was to get some of these stories that maybe weren't as well known. And in fact, for that project, there are a couple short films of Larry Grant. And so if you want to hear Larry's personal story where he was born in a hop field, up the valley, all these kinds of things. His time is valuable, so you can hear his stories online instead of him having to tell it 130 times to each of you. We thought that was a good way to make efficient use of his time. But one of the things is to get some of these stories. And one of the other stories was Senator Lillian Dick of Saskatchewan, who grew up in North Battleford, Saskatchewan, and her father was a Chinese restaurant owner, a cafe owner, and her mother came from the local Cree First Nations. And so I think one of the really interesting things about her story, and you can find that online as well, is how she was told by her mother to actually not tell anyone that she was Aboriginal. And it was only after she had finished her PhD that she felt that she was going to come out and say, I'm not just Chinese, I'm Aboriginal. And so that bespeaks a lot about the history of racial discrimination, that even with the Chinese suffering so much in terms of racial discrimination, it was still better to be known as Chinese than to be known as an Indigenous person. And so it shows again that crossing the river wasn't the same river experience, so to speak, even if you were in a boat together. So one of the things that, again, after Cedar and Bamboo, there was a very, I think, creative city planner and cultural planning named Baldwin Wong. He said, we need to have a rigor process. And so I was really honored to be the co-chair of a series of dialogues between First Nations, urban Aboriginal, and immigrant communities. And Deb was part of that steering committee as well, under different guise. I think you were a teacher back then, principal, so that was really about getting communities that perhaps had a lot of shared misunderstandings of each other to just get together and talk over food. We'd have these dialogue circles, we had exchange visits, there's places in Vancouver I'd never been to before that for the first time I was able to visit through this process. And it was to just start opening up dialogues. And it ran for 3 years, and what it ended up doing was actually also reshaping the way we thought of where we were. So the co-chairs of that were Councillor Wade Grant, at the time Councillor of Musqueam, and Susan Tatouche, who was the director of the Urban Aboriginal Friendship Society. And one of the things we did was we said, what do we need to do beyond talking? And one was, next slide, to create a newcomer's guide that right away, for newcomers, new immigrants to Canada, said, where are you? Whose land are you on? Who's your real host here? Because people who come, they feel like guests, and they feel we're the guests of the Canadian government. Well, actually, no, you're the guests of the First Nations who were here, who welcomed those who took the land and made Canada. That's who you're a guest of. And so to get that idea right away in a newcomer's guide, to also go through the process of creating, with the number of First Nations here in this area, in the Lower Mainland, Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, oh my God, Squamish. That's bad. Don't take anything by that. Oh, you erase that from the film, sorry. And Squamish. And to work with them on a guide to what they see as their place here. And again, for newcomers to get that idea, orientation right away. It's online for those who want to look at it. It's good for not just new immigrants, it's good for people who've gone through school here and maybe have never been taught a single time who their local hosts are in terms of First Nations. So I would encourage all of you to actually use that as a resource guide. It is passed through the right protocol in terms of the information in there is not made up, or it's not someone's interpretation who doesn't know. It is coming from the local First Nations. So I'm going to quickly move on. Sorry. In May of last year, or actually 2014, we had a provincial official apology for anti-Chinese legislation. And that apology was really an important moment. I was told I shouldn't take any pictures, but I did anyways. So I was sitting there on the floor of the legislature, and it was quite a moving experience. It's one of the reasons why I became a historian instead of a lawyer, was to be able to witness one of these kinds of moments of acknowledging our past, of reconciling with it. One of the things we did was to create, legacy projects. So those who are aspiring teachers, there is a resource online now called Bamboo Shoots that was just completed in the fall. All the facts are correct. The approach there is, again, to have a history of Chinese Canadians as a part of BC history that, again, gets it right. We also had a process of having public nominations. People nominate, what are some significant sites for Chinese Canadian history that maybe have been ignored? And so we had 133 nominations come forward for 77 different places. A committee of the Chinese Canadian Historical Society went through and tried to assess their significance. There was supposed to be a list of 10. We said 10 isn't going to do. So there ended up being a list of 21. And why, to me, I'm telling you this part, it's really relevant today, is 2 of those sites were nominated by First Nations to recognize the Chinese Canadian history on their territory. One was a set of old historic gold mining sites. There were Chinese gold mining sites around the Fraser River up and down near Lytton, nominated by Lytton First Nation. And the other I'll talk about to end this. So this are some pictures of Browning's Flat, which is around just near Lytton, BC. And these are sites that really were mined from the 1860s, 1880s on. It's really difficult to get there except by raft now. That's how the original miners got there. And they would come back year after year. And they're actually quite spectacular. You can see in the bottom right corner, these are water sluices that were removing wastewater. They are 1 kilometer long. And you can see, it's pretty awe-inspiring. They're hand stacking these walls with the stones. And so they're quite spectacular. You can see some of those facts that the Chinese went to the gold rushes of California, Australia, New Zealand, here in BC, the Yukon. They formed a large proportion of the workforce because they were mostly young and male. And they tended to stay longer than other gold rushers. They worked the same site. This site was worked probably for almost a decade. They tended to also, and this is important, to engage with local First Nations in a way that was respectful and reciprocal. In other words, if they're staying, they weren't there to exploit. They asked before they started digging holes. They farmed. They traded goods with local First Nations. We made a film called Gold Mountain River, again, sort of taking young people and old, 8-year-olds to 82-year-olds. You can see that online if you want to see some of these sites through the film. The second place that was nominated was the Chinese farms at Musqueam. And Musqueam First Nation, Musqueam Indian Band, nominated these sites. There were 18 historical farms. Elder Larry Grant is the child of one of the families that was created out of those farms being there. And Sarah Ling, who will come up a little later to introduce the second film you'll be seeing, has been working on an oral history project to gather a lot of the stories of the elders, both Musqueam and Chinese Canadian, about those farms, so that the memory of them isn't lost. And so 19 interviews, there was a lot of archival documents about the farms. And just to be clear, those farms were there because the Indian agent at Musqueam said, okay, you can come farm here. Musqueam wasn't asked. And yet, even with that long history of those 18 farms that were all the way until the 1980s, the relations between the farmers and those in the community was very strong. And that's what came out of that project, was how, again, respectful those relations were and how they are still looked back on as an example. And so what is the example? So one of the things we've been doing over this Legacy Initiatives Advisory, I'm the co-chair of a group that advises the province how to have legacies out of that apology. And one is, as I said, to recognize those sites. But another is to actually think about what is the right way. What's the right way to treat each other in this time? You know, we know and acknowledge that long history of colonialism, of racism, of exploitation, of that river that First Nations and Chinese had to cross. But what should we be doing moving forward? And one is consultations that are respectful. So it was really important that it was for Lytton and Musqueam that nominated those sites to acknowledge that they were on their territory, their unceded, ancestral, traditional territory. It was also to think about the relationship with China, to actually also send a signal about this is the history that you should know about, that long history of relations of respect. And so the Chinese Consul General became involved, and Chinese business people who are wanting to invest in BC. And the first is to deal fairly with the First Nations. And so there was also some present political work of acknowledging where we live along this. Okay, that's it. That's the last slide. Okay, so that's the last slide. Just to tell you where these pictures are taking place, this is an announcement that was made about those 21 sites, and this is John Hogan and Christine Brown from Lytton First Nation talking about one of the sites up at Lytton. And the announcement was made at Musqueam, both for symbolic reasons, but also, again, to drive home the point of where we are. And so that's my segue into showing this clip that was made by Sarah Ling in a class run by Al Yoshizawa. And just to give you the background while she's queuing it up, Al Yoshizawa is a physics major here, and he was in one of my classes, a history class, doing oral histories, and he did a wonderful oral history about his grandfather. And at that point, very quickly, he started becoming a filmmaker and stopped being a physics major. Although he understands how the light works and the physics of everything, but he's become a fantastic filmmaker. He was the lead filmmaker during our Chinese Stories project. He's made a lot of films. Sarah has also gotten into the bug of filmmaking, and they are producing and directing a film called All Our Father's Relations. You'll see a trailer for that. But first, this is a short clip called Peeking into the Pink Houses. Just want to get it right, because there are a couple old farmhouses that date back at Musqueam from those Chinese farms. And so she did this film for Al's filmmaking class. If you're interested, this class is a great way to not become a filmmaker if you don't want to, but to tell stories using really what is the new essay, right? Which is to be able to make films that are compelling, tell a story, convince people. It's the way we're communicating with each other in more and more powerful ways because of technological change. So we'll show it. Thank you.
There are 3 pink houses, and from what I recall, I think my dad, my uncle built the homes. 3 homes, 3 bedrooms, small kitchen, a small laundry area with back porch, front porch, white picket fence even. And my mom always enjoyed gardening, her pansy, her dahlias, I remember. Green grass, lawn, surrounded the whole house. So again, it was home, and I imagine it would be somewhere around the neighborhood of 1,800 square feet, but it was like a castle.
After the 70s, the Chinese families moved out and the houses stayed there and lay dormant for many years, and I thought it would be a good opportunity to start photographing the inside of the houses. And I work with Musqueam in the nomination process to designate the pink houses as a Chinese historic site in British Columbia.
My father's family lived on the farm here in Musqueam, that on leased land, and the company's name was Ling and Sue. They had the two names. My dad came to Canada at an early age. I believe the first time he came to Canada, he was 15 years old. And he was here for a few years and then went back to China. Then when he came back, he met my mother, and from my understanding, he asked my grandfather and my mother's side for my mother's hand in marriage. So my grandfather accepted him, and I have 2 older brothers and 1 younger brother. I remember all the workers that came into Canada. It was mostly family members that started. Their wives weren't here, and then gradually, like in my mid-teens, when they started, their wives started coming into Canada. Then the family just sort of grew from there.
我滾花1923年嚟滾花嗰啲 friend 翻到 China 講話，話我滾花做工係湯魚，做魚濕，未見過我滾花1960幾年佢死咗咯。我翻嚟都未見過滾花。
My mother and father both farmed for a number of years. Suwon farm, Linan farm. I got to say that a lot of production. Everybody worked hard. There was no such thing as, say, so-called holidays, and no such thing as vacations. Everybody just worked hard. And the children, sure, we didn't know much, but we worked side by side with our parents as a play day. With the Grant family, it's a long story. I didn't really understand how the family tree worked even, but through stories from my uncles, from the elders, that I'm a uncle or a granduncle of, say, Gordon and to Larry and to Helen and to Howard. And my father always told me that his nephew is Gordon's father. So again, the age difference, the generation difference. Even my children don't understand the age gap between my family and the Grant family. 2 years ago, we had an opportunity to visit China, Zhongshan area, Xiaqi, Simun. It was eye-opener for myself, sure, but for the Grant family. They were waiting for us. The family in China were waiting for the Grant family to visit. It's something that you never imagine, that after 60, 70 years, finding your father's home, very emotional for the Grant family. This home is still my home. When I visit the Musqueam area, I gotta say, looking at the pink houses, it brings back a lot of good memories. And I share those memories with both my kids. At a young age, I did drive the family for a Sunday drive to the Musqueam area.
He would actually go inside, point at a specific
Spot, yeah.
and be like, that's where I used to live. And then he'd point out a bunch of other houses. Okay, this is where this person lived. This is where I used to do this. This is where I used to do that. And like, so much has been changed, but I still remember this place like it's home.
Because it was your grandfather built his house first, and then your granduncle, Jerry's dad, they built his, and then my Uncle Tommy had the smaller house. There was 3 pink houses.
Wow.
3 pink houses.
Yeah.
Why pink of all colors?
I don't know.
It was the color back then. That was the in
the most
color.
fashionable?
I don't know. They were the only ones that had pink houses.
Yeah.
I have a lot of memories. You know, I think about the family when I see those houses. I think about the closeness that we had and how much fun I had living there and being around in the farm, you know, in the fields. With my son now, he's expecting his first child, and he says when the baby is a few weeks old, he's taking the baby out to the young nursery and the hop-on farm, so that his daughter will know who her family is and that she is of Asian descent.
To remember the Chinese farmers on Musqueam, it's very important because right now we're 100 years of history now of having a relationship with the Chinese farmers. We just can't forget that.
How I feel is that your roots, your culture, you have to remember where we're from.
Twice already, and every time I watch it, there's something else I take away from it. You ready to do your next one? So the next film, because Sarah's a pretty busy girl. She does a lot of things on campus, and while she's setting that up, this is the next film that she's working on. The poster is there. It's all our father's relations. And again, it's a continuation of the story of what we highlighted in this last little clip about that past 100 years, the relationship between Musqueam and the Chinese community. And, you know, as she's setting up, I just want to say, like, UBC is celebrating its 100th year. And a lot of times when we talk about that, we think as students and people on campus, what was happening here as a university. But at the same time, we've just heard in this last clip about the last 100 years with the relationships of the community members that are surrounding this university and that were here before the university. So I think it's just hang on to those little nuggets, and later on we might have some opportunity to have some questions. So without further ado, I'll let you do the intro.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I've been introduced already, but I just want to personally say that as a Chinese Canadian growing up in Prince Rupert, BC on Xinjiang territory, what Henry said really resonates with me, that Chinese and First Nations relations have always existed. As a family that's been in northern BC for over a centennial, I can speak to that through the stories of my ancestors and my relatives. And so I've been really fortunate to study and work down here on unceded Musqueam territory and be welcomed into the community, to be taught by elders and colleagues here sitting here in the room. And so I'd just like to acknowledge all of you here who have supported my journey in being a storyteller and sharing your stories with me. It's really great to see all of you here, and many of you here in the front row. Thank you. And I just wanted to share a little tidbit about how all our brothers' relations came to exist. And so it started with this idea 4 years ago now. I'll just show you. This is a screenshot of an email I pulled up today. So Henry forwarded this suggestion, as he often does as a professor. And then
Other people do the work, yeah.
this was after Al and I had started to work together through the Chinese Canadian Stories Project. So Al, as an expert self-taught filmmaker, I was just learning as an editor, as a wannabe producer. We talked about how cool it would be to follow in the footsteps of Cedar and Bamboo and perhaps create another film. Cedar and Bamboo really broke the ground and started a dialogue about Chinese First Nations relations across the country. So we always joked about making a Cedar and Bamboo 2. So this is a note I sent to Al in 2012. And now, 4 years later, we are really fortunate to be working with the Grant family to make a feature-length film called All Our Fathers' Relations that documents their journey back to their father's ancestral village in Seimun, Guangdong, which we went there with them in 2013, as well as their experiences growing up as Chinese Musqueam elders and the devastating impacts that legislation has created within Chinese Canadian Indigenous communities, but also the ongoing impacts today, how these policies still continue to dictate our identities, how Indigenous peoples are represented in mainstream media, all of this. And so it's really great to share the premiere of the trailer with you today. It's the official trailer, and it will go live, or it's already live now, but you're the first to see it. So I will now play the trailer.
It has been told to me by my ancestors, the old people that I got to meet, are people always living on the shores of this great river called the Fraser River today, at a site where the xว์məthkվəy grass grew abundantly. And if you can imagine how that must have looked, and then you think about the people who were here, the Musqueam people, I wasn't aware of until someone raised it with me, that my father was non-Aboriginal. I found out that the wave of the Chinese population coming from China, people no longer searched for the Gold Mountain, but searched for a new way of life.
Right here at the corner of Georgia and Gore. This is where my brother and I grew up. We lived across the street over here.
There's a lot of my cousins and that relatives that worked on the boats. They're fishermen, mostly fishermen.
My mother was the last full 100% speaking Hunkaminam speaker of our community. Within our culture, which was an oral history culture, it was important to know who your bloodlines were.
The government of Canada is the one that decrees whether you are worthy of status as an Indian person. We were classified as Chinese, but we grew up as Musqueam people, as Musqueam children.
Government created legislation that tore apart family structures.
It took Uncle Edmund 2 or 3 years of talking to encourage us to go to see the village of our father and our grandparents.
Our mother and our dad went through a whole lot, and yet they persevered, and their legacy lives through us and our children, and I'm so thankful for that.
released now, but the whole production will be viewed this summer. So hang on to those dates, and hopefully you'll be able to sit down and see it. And will it be on a theater, or where do you think it might?
As most films do, they are premiered through film festivals, but we will definitely arrange a local community screening for Musqueam first, and then proceed with the public screening. So stay tuned through the website, and we're really to have you all together.
Thank you. Okay, so something really exciting next, if you haven't been thrilled already. Something else that Sarah has been working on, that sometimes I sit back and I know everybody works really hard on campus, but these ideas just keep percolating out of her, and she just makes them happen. That's what I love about Sarah. So the piece that we're going to call some people up today, there's a book. This is just the front of the book. But Sarah and a group of people, Larry Grant, Joanne Poon, and Sarah Ling, I believe they're going to come up and do some reading from this book. And I'm going to unfortunately just tell you the title in English, because the other two ways I cannot say. So the book is called Let's Take a Walk, and it's a multilingual Musqueam children's book. And all the proceeds of this book go back into the language materials, the development of language materials for Musqueam children and youth, because as it was briefly sort of highlighted in these films, I think the last two, that the Musqueam language, it was something due to the government's policies and practices, the language was beginning to be lost. So this is something that community members, and Sarah on her part is making a resurgence of this language and making it something that all children can get it here, but Musqueam children can have it in their families as well. So Sarah, Elder Grant, and Joanne? There we are. I was trying to search for you.
So we're excited to share this little narrative for you. It's based on Larry's childhood, and he's about 3 years old in the story, based on a photograph he discovered later in his life. We're really fortunate to have Musqueam Language and Culture Department here, who supported this initiative with the Musqueam Indian Band. And as we normally do, we'll have Larry start off each page in Hunkaminam, followed by Joanne, who will read in Cantonese and is the narrator on the CD, followed by myself, the boring part in English. So, I'll also be flipping the pages. So I hope you enjoy this. And perhaps Larry could begin.
The title is xasəm and xasəm.
個書名咧就係我們出去走走啦。
Let's take a walk.
Now, each way out, and the lolly, the lieutenant Musqueam. I can follow it, but see that's up.
喂，你好嗎？我叫禮興，我住喺馬斯琴㗎，好高興見到你。
Hi, are you well? My name is Larry. I'm from Musqueam. I'm happy to be here.
Tam hops is in quan. E kapatas sanatin ko hops ka special.
我喺酒花季節盛開嘅時候出世嘅，我媽媽摘酒花嘅，要做好多工作㗎。
I was born at the time of the hops. My mother gathers hops. It's lots of work.
Unkaminam kan sanatin. Cantonese kan sanatin. 2000 Unkaminam e Cantonese.
我媽媽咧識講 Hunkaminam， 我爸爸咧就講廣東話，我都會講 Hunkaminam， 亦都識講一啲嘅廣東話嘅。
My mother speaks Hunkaminam. My father speaks Cantonese. I can understand Hunkaminam and Cantonese a bit.
I swear, is that them in casa?
天氣好好啊，我哋出去行一行啦。
Nice day, isn't it? Let's take a walk.
the captain at Capilano. Stormicat Capilano was Halisto Musqueam Mustaya. The Sabio Capilano adds in the
呢度咧係 Capilano 嘅屋界處。Capilano 係一個戰士嚟㗎，保護我哋馬斯琴族。佢亦都係我嘅外源祖父。哇！
This is the house post of Cayapolano. Cayapolano was a warrior who protected our Musqueam people. Cayapolano was my great-great-great-grandfather. Wow.
Queenan said, Sema said, Ma said.
聽下，水裏邊有啲聲喎，係咩嚟㗎？原來係隻鴨啊！
Listen, whatever is that? It's a duck.
Now, each to eat at Molly. Near tap Quetznem to Stalo.
呢度咧就係 Molly，你睇下嗰條河幾靚。
Hey, we're at Molly. Do you see the river? The river looks so pretty.
Nano I ame to Stalo.
哦，嗰條河好靚啊！
The river looks so pretty. Sorry about that.
Khaled Musqueam was named by it near Molly.
有好多馬斯琴人嚟 Molly 度捉啲野鴨㗎。
Many people from Musqueam go duck hunting at Molly.
Amita, look what? What did cut the shell? I see him. Upon them to spike up to the window China.
大家一齊嚟睇下，有好多紅蘿蔔啊！多謝你啊！嗰個喺田裏邊嘅人咧，佢喺中國廣東省嚟㗎。
Come here, everyone. Look, there are a lot of carrots. Thank you, sir. That man is planting. He is from Guangdong, China.
Sla to the farm, Xenamen. Quicker to Linon Yun. Kach to Shai, Musqueam.
呢度係我爸爸嘅菜園，叫林安園。佢每日都要做好多工作㗎。
This is my dad's farm. They call it Ling Onion. It's lots of work every day.
Nata Swale near Chinatown.
有一日，阿禮兄就同爸爸去唐人街。
One day in Chinatown.
Stem to eat.
呢啲係咩嚟㗎？
What is this?
Smutkins Musmasa to eat. Wanano I.
呢啲係牛腦嚟㗎，好好食㗎。
This is calf brain. It's very good.
Collect each queen.
咩嚟話？我聽唔清楚喎。
Again, what did you say?
Need to move. That Smutkins Musmasa. Dad.
係牛腦嚟㗎，試下。
I said calf brain. Try it.
Oh. The sleep was chassis tofu farm.
我唔要，我要食叉燒豆腐飯。
No. I want chassis tofu fan. Barbecue pork with tofu rice.
好啦。
Yes, son.
Oh, Debra. Oh. Sorry. Lolly. Some seven cinnamon nut.
禮兄，食晏啦！嚟啦，媽媽。
Larry. It's lunchtime, my son.
哦，嚟啦，媽媽。
Yes, Mom.
Oh, Debra. Book, huh?
哦，呢本係咩嚟㗎？係一本書。
Oh, whatever is that? Is it a book?
Slama tina schwalistan. Aiman halik sina schwalawan.
呢個係我張相嚟㗎，好靚咧，我好開心啊！
It's my picture. Beautiful. I feel so joyful.
Lali, Lali, Amisa, Ashton, I, Quadlington. The hours.
禮軒過嚟食嘢啦，好啊，我好肚餓啊，拜拜。
Larry, come here and eat. Good, I'm hungry. So long for now. Peace, ties, yes.
Thank you, all of you. I just have to say a couple of final words, and then hopefully we'll have a few minutes. We can open it up to some questions. But just throughout today's presentations and talks and the stories that were shared, to me, I think the key thing that keeps coming out is the importance of understanding ourselves, our stories, our connections with our families, and the connections amongst each other, and how that all plays a part in who we are today, the development of our country. And you saw some really unique ways to bring those stories out, whether it's the films, the lovely children's book, through taking classes with an amazing professor. So there's all kinds of ways to be able to unpack some of the history. And I think Sarah and Larry and Henry, you've done a really wonderful job bringing the stories forward and allowing all of us to have a greater understanding of our Musqueam community members and how we all play a part in that as well. So does anybody have any questions that you'd like to, I can become Vanna White now and run around. Come on. Does anybody have any comments that you'd like to share? Does anybody want to sing karaoke? All right, well maybe I can also just, if Larry, if you'd like to say a few last words, I won't put you on the spot. If you want to say something else, or Henry?
It's really, really something to see this happen and see how it developed. When you live your life and it's an everyday thing that things happen, sometimes you don't think that they would be of interest to anyone. And when you do finally put it down and people accept it, and it's really neat. And I can remember that day when we were in Chinatown, and this bowl of soup came to the table. And we were already eating it, and boy, I could smell that. It really, really had a great smell, you know. It smelled really delicious. Then I looked into the bowl and I said, what is that? and I couldn't get that piece of that calf brain into my mouth. I could not do it. There's very few things that I am not able to eat because we got to learn to eat three ways. The British way, the Cantonese way, and the Musqueam way. You know, the Musqueam people are very, very well. We all do the same, but we still eat all of the animal. But when we go down to some place like Vancouver Hotel, you don't get that. And but the Scotsmen, I think, are the ones that are the best at eating the vital organs, the haggis. I just wanted to say that, a few little things about how we are as people when we become sophisticated. We don't eat the whole animal, we huck it away. So I want to say thank you again. Thank you to everyone that helped to put all of this together, especially Sarah and Al and Henry, for all of that work doing the filming and editing. It's really, really a great thing to see that. And I want to say thank you again to all of you that are here today, taking a little time out of your life to be here, to experience something, and I hope it is a big enough teaser for our film to have some meaning to people about relationships and how people can be successful together, even if they're living under some kind of oppression, and make a relationship that's bountiful for each community. So I hope that that message that comes out. Thank you.
So we have just a few more moments, but then we, now we've got a couple of questions.
Is there any relationship between the First Nations?
Let me run this over here just so everyone can hear you. Give me a chance to chat.
Is there any relationship between the First Nations people and the Japanese? Like the Japanese look, similar to Chinese, and they also come to Canada in the 1800s.
I think I will ask. So, Professor, you.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can keep the mic up there because I have a loud, booming, rude voice. There are actually stories. They aren't as well, I think, gathered, but there's a very actually well-documented story up in the Yukon of a Japanese man marrying into a local indigenous community and sort of what happened after that. The fishing communities, especially of Japanese Canadians around coastal BC, had ongoing relations with local indigenous communities of various sorts. I mean, there was, now, again, let's not make this a Pollyannish history either of BC, because we're talking about limited resources that were essentially taken away from First Nations. So fish is a particular way of understanding how a colonial government comes in and says, all these fish are ours, we'll leave some to you who are already here for your sustenance, but you're not allowed to sell it, right? Even though it was all yours before. Now you can only fish to eat, and then we're going to take the rest and have licenses that are in our control to give as licenses to Japanese, but then we don't like the Japanese, we'll take those licenses away and give it to someone else. And so this is a colonial process, and so in some sense, colonial processes are generally a story of divide and rule. Keep people split up and pit them against each other. And so, again, thinking about the history of Chinese and First Nations in British Columbia, it is actually amazing how long sort of respectful and reciprocal relations in many parts of BC. So I'll give you an example of Chinese-Canadian cafes. That these were often a space that local First Nations people were welcome, unlike many other stores and other businesses. Another example is up the Fraser at places like Stalo, Chilliwack. Chinese farms, again, often had very good relations with the local Stalo people, and there's a lot of intermarriage near Stalo with Chinese. And so I'm not saying that this is all a rosy picture, because there are other things about liquor and alcohol, and whether local stores were going to sell alcohol. And so it's a complex story. But I think when you look at the relations between indigenous people and all those who came here from other places, what are the lessons to learn, you could say, about when people followed right relations and respected local protocol and asked before taking. I think those are some of the ways that. So it's a long way of saying there were relations, but I think there's a lot of work to be done still to actually go find stories that have been forgotten or maybe repressed or erased.
Thank you.
I don't know. We have some. Tosh and Mary Kitagawa. I don't know if you've heard any other stories over the years that you want to.
Never.
Yeah. Oh, Al. But Al, you got some?
Oh, this is from my granduncle.
Yeah.
Who they're in Lillooet.
So Al's granduncle in Lillooet, again, a place where there, up to Fraser, you had a lot more relations between people who just lived up the Fraser. It was just, smaller populations of towns, and small towns you often have different kinds of relationships than in a big city.
So Larry's going to share about some other initiatives that are taking place in partnership between other institutions and communities, but I just wanted to quickly say that for myself, as also a guest to this territory, it's important for me to perhaps locate myself and only speak to my own experiences and my own relations, and so it's great to have a collective effort and not just depend on one group of people to tell all the stories, but there's some fascinating work going on around the Lower Mainland and through the Asian Canadian and Ancient Studies Migration Program, which just launched about a year ago, and the students in those courses are finding ways to connect themselves to the narratives and to speak to many different communities here in BC.
Yeah, there's right now I think there's a workshop that's going to happen in mid-March, and it's going to be headed by Professor Price from UVic on South Spring Island, trying to bring out the stories between the Chinese, more stories between the Chinese, the Japanese, the Hawaiians, and the black people that were there in the Gulf Islands. So that, but until those stories come out, there's not much, there's not really much that hidden history or untold history is not coming forward. We're just trying to stimulate that, and that'll be near the end of March of this year. So that's a lot of those things. And Musqueam had hosted the Komagata Maru incident workshop or gala, I guess it was. I can't remember the title it was, but the South Asian community was down there doing the 100-year Komagata Maru incident that happened here in Canada, in Stanley Park, actually, Burrard Inlet, where they literally starved the South Asians and made them go back to either to China or back to India. So that's probably the best I can say. We are trying to open it up wider. There's huge intermarriage. Belakula, young Japanese, half Japanese, no, quarter Japanese. Aboriginal man married Japanese woman. He left the community probably with his parents and came back to his community in Belakula and became proficient in his language, his grandfather's language, and become a Belakula language teacher. But not disregarding his Japanese heritage. So it's really interesting to see people come back and grow to be a part of the Aboriginal roots also. So it's really interesting. But there's Japanese connections up in the valley. So that they go back maybe 3 generations, but it's more Chinese than Japanese. So thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Unfortunately, we don't have time for any more questions in this room, but we can shift over to the other section of the hallway here. But before we move on, I want to acknowledge the work, Larry, that you've offered us, the words today, and all of the work that you do on campus and in the films. Sarah, Alan, Henry, amazing job, and it's...
Helen Conrad.
Oh, yes! Oh, there we go. Our movie star. Did you want to turn around and give a wave? Because people probably didn't even recognize you. There you go. So again, amazing work that's being done, truly informative, and it leaves us with lots to think about, and I think a lot of ways for us to reconsider our relationships with each other and start moving forward in different directions for a lot of people that did not know the history that you guys shared with us today. So I really appreciate it, and it has been an exciting part of the Lunar Festival. So if I can ask you Not that I need to, but I'd love to join me in a great round of applause for all of you.